My name is Annie. I'm 81 years old, and I want to tell you about the Tuesday I realized nobody knew I was still alive. Not in a dramatic way, not the way you'd think. I hadn't fallen. Nothing had happened. I was right here, standing at this kitchen sink, water running over my hands, and it occurred to me, just like that, the way a cold draft comes through a window you forgot to close, that I had not spoken a single word out loud in 4 days. 4 days. And the part that unsettled me most wasn't the 4 days themselves. It was that I hadn't noticed until that moment. It hadn't felt like anything. Just Tuesday, then Wednesday, then the weekend, and then back to Tuesday again. And the silence had been so consistent, it had started to feel like company. I turned off the faucet and stood there for a long time. I'd spent 60 years being needed by Earl, by 6 children, by whatever job was paying me at the time, needed constantly, sometimes more than I had to give. And then one by one, all of it fell away, the way leaves fall, so gradually you don't realize the tree is bare until one morning you just look up. And I was standing at that sink and the quiet felt enormous. I thought I was handling it fine. That's the first thing I want to say. I genuinely believed I was managing. I was wrong about a number of things. The first one was so simple I'm still a little embarrassed to admit it. I had stopped leaving the house. Not entirely, not dramatically. I wasn't locked inside with the curtains drawn. But I'd cut things down. Stopped going to places that weren't strictly necessary. Grocery store, yes. Pharmacy when I had to. Church, most Sundays. But sitting in the back and slipping out before anyone could catch me in a conversation. I told myself I was just being sensible, conserving energy. I wasn't as young as I used to be, and the days were long, and frankly, people were exhausting. What I didn't understand, what took me an embarrassingly long time to understand, was that I was losing the habit of being around people. And like most habits you lose, you don't notice while it's happening. You only notice when you try to pick it back up and find that it's harder than it should be. The first time I pushed myself to go to a community evening at the church hall. Just a simple thing, tables, coffee, people sitting around talking about nothing. I almost turned back at the door. I stood outside in the cold for probably 3 minutes. I felt ridiculous. I'm a woman who raised 6 children and worked double shifts and handled every crisis that ever came through my door. And I was standing outside a church hall, afraid to walk in alone. I went in. Nobody made a fuss. A woman named Bertha, who I'd known loosely for years, moved her purse off the chair next to her and said, "Sit down, Annie. My feet are killing me, and I need someone to complain to." I sat down. We complained about our feet for 20 minutes. It was the best conversation I'd had in months. Not because it was important, because it was ordinary, because I was present somewhere with someone. And I hadn't had to earn it or justify it or be useful for it. I hadn't known how much I missed ordinary until Bertha made room for it at a folding table with bad coffee. The second thing I was doing wrong was harder to see because I was convinced I wasn't doing it wrong at all. My health. I had always been the kind of person who pushed through. You don't feel well, you push through. You're tired, you push through. You've been ignoring that thing in your side for 2 months. You push through because there's always something that needs doing, and stopping to deal with yourself feels self-indulgent. That attitude had served me in certain ways over the years. It had also almost cost me something serious about 3 years after Earl passed. I'd been having what I called dizzy spells, which is the word you use when you don't want to say you nearly sat down on the floor of your own hallway 3 times in 1 week. I wasn't alarmed. I figured it was tiredness or the heat or simply being 78 years old, which I had decided was a reasonable explanation for most things. I hadn't been to the doctor in over a year. Had rescheduled twice because something always came up, and then stopped rescheduling because I felt fine, mostly, and fine felt like enough. My youngest finally drove me in when she happened to call during one of those spells and heard something in my voice that I hadn't heard myself. She didn't make a fuss about it. She just said, "I'm taking you Tuesday," and she said it in a way that was not a question. The doctor looked at my numbers and got very quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Carter, how long have you been feeling like this?" I said, "A few weeks." He said, "Your blood pressure has been in a dangerous range. You could have had a stroke." I sat there on that paper-covered table under those flat white lights and felt for a moment completely foolish. Not because I'd been sick, because I'd been managing it alone, quietly, privately, in the way I managed everything, and I'd called that strength. When what it actually was stubbornness dressed up in sensible clothes. I go every 6 months now without being asked. I write the dates on the calendar in the kitchen. Not because I'll forget, but because seeing them there makes them feel like commitments, like things I owe myself, which it turns out they are. The third thing, this one I still feel a small flicker of embarrassment about, which I think means it was the most important. About 2 years into living alone, I had let the house go. Not collapsed, not ruined, just allowed to quietly accumulate the evidence of one person who had stopped performing for anyone, including herself. Mail on the kitchen table that I kept meaning to sort. A broken cabinet hinge I stepped around for 4 months. Curtains in the back bedroom that had been halfway off the rod since the previous autumn and that I kept telling myself I'd fix on a day when I had more energy, which never seemed to arrive. It sounds minor. It didn't feel minor. The mail pile quietly stressed me every time I walked through the kitchen, which was often. Which was 10 or 15 times a day. The broken hinge made a sound every time I opened the cabinet. Small, constant, low-level reminders that things were not being managed, that I was not on top of it, and nobody was coming to see it. That was the part I told myself. Nobody's coming over. It doesn't matter. But I was seeing it every single day. One Saturday morning, I had Denise over. She dropped off something and I'd made coffee, and she didn't say a word about any of it. But I watched myself watching her look at the room, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Ashamed, not of her judgment, of my own, of the distance between the woman I'd always been and the one currently standing in this kitchen with a mail pile that reached the fruit bowl. I don't know why that particular morning shifted something, but it did. I spent the whole afternoon dealing with just that table. Nothing else, just the table. Sorted the mail, threw away what needed throwing, paid what needed paying, put the rest in a folder I found in the bottom drawer. The table was clear by 4 o'clock. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at it and felt disproportionately, almost ridiculously better. Not because the table mattered that much, because I did. I will say, I also found 3 things in that pile I had genuinely forgotten about, including a birthday card for one of my grandchildren that had not been sent. I'm not going to tell you which one. That's between me and my conscience. The cabinet hinge got fixed the following week. The curtains the week after that. I hired a young man from down the street to deal with a few things I couldn't manage myself. Didn't love asking. Did it anyway. You can fall into the idea that because you live alone, the state of your home is only about practicality, about function. It isn't. It's about what you tell yourself when you walk through the rooms every morning. The 4th thing crept up so slowly I didn't recognize it until someone else named it. I had stopped eating properly, not dramatically. I wasn't going hungry, but I had collapsed the whole operation of cooking down to whatever required the least effort and could be eaten standing up. A piece of bread with something on it, a bowl of cereal at 6 in the evening, crackers, things that didn't require plates or sitting down or the performance of a meal. Because who was it for? That was the thought I had every time I looked at the stove. Who's this for? There's nobody to cook for, nobody to sit across from, nobody who'll notice or care whether I made something real or just ate whatever was nearest. But after several months of that, I felt dreadful. Not sick exactly, just flat, low and tired in a way that didn't improve with sleep. It took my sister Gloria pointing it out. She'd come for the weekend and watched me eat half a piece of toast for dinner and said, not unkindly but clearly, "Annie Mae, you are not taking care of yourself." I started sitting at the table for meals, even when it was just soup, even when I was the only one there. It sounds like nothing. A person sitting at a table, but something about the act of setting a place, even a simple one, even just a bowl and a spoon, told some part of me that the meal mattered, that I was worth the small ceremony of it. I eat better now, not perfectly, but I sit down. And most days that's enough. The fifth thing I avoided for longer than I should have was anything to do with safety. I am not a woman who likes to think of herself as fragile. I have carried things, literally and otherwise, that would have buckled other people. I walked out of situations that should have kept me down. And I had, over the years, developed a private conviction that I was simply not the kind of person things happened to. That conviction is, I now understand, both useless and dangerous. A woman I used to see at church, Dorothy her name was, lived about 3 blocks over, fell in her bathroom one winter morning. She was on that tile floor for 6 hours before her daughter came by and found her. 6 hours, cold floor, alone, unable to get up. She told me about it afterward, and the part that stayed with me wasn't the fall itself. It was how she described the 6 hours. The complete helplessness of lying there, unable to do anything, knowing nobody was coming because nobody knew. That image stayed with me for months. I did not buy a medical alert device immediately. I resisted it, the way I resist most things that feel like admissions. It felt like conceding something about myself that I wasn't ready to concede. But I tripped one afternoon. Nothing major, just caught my foot on the edge of the rug in the hallway, grabbed the wall in time. And I stood there for a moment breathing and thought about Dorothy on that tile floor. And then I thought about the fact that nobody would have known. The rug is gone now. All the rugs are gone, actually. I had a moment of mourning for them, and then I remembered they were rugs, not family members, and I let it go. I have better lights in the hallways. A grab bar in the bathroom that I had installed by the same young man who fixed the cabinet. I have a phone charged and within reach at all times, which is more than I can say for certain. And I have a list, on paper, on actual paper, of people to call in an emergency, with their numbers written in letters large enough that I don't need to find my glasses first. My youngest, Denise, 3 houses down. The neighbor on the other side. Prepared is not the same as frightened. That took me a while to understand. The 6th thing is one I almost didn't include because it still feels too personal. But I think that probably means I should. After Earl died, after the children settled back into their own lives, after the structure of being needed by everyone dissolved, I didn't know what I was for anymore. I don't mean that in a self-pitying way. I mean it practically. I had been organized around function for 60 years. Every morning had a purpose attached to it. Someone to feed, somewhere to be, something that required me specifically. And then it didn't. And I woke up on too many mornings and couldn't answer the question, even to myself, just privately, before I got out of bed, of what the day was actually for. That is a particular kind of emptiness. Not loneliness, exactly. More like weightlessness. The kind that feels bad, not good. It took an accidental conversation with Kayla. She was doing homework at this table one afternoon, and she looked up and said, out of nowhere, "Miss Annie, what's your favorite part of the day?" To make me realize I hadn't thought about that in years. I had to sit with the question for a moment. And then I realized I was sitting with it here, at this table, while she did homework and I had coffee. And that this was, quietly, one of my favorite parts. Not because it was meaningful in any large sense, because it was mine. I'd chosen it. Nobody had assigned it to me or required it of me. I was simply present, and it was enough, and I liked it. I started noticing more of those moments after that. The morning coffee before anything else starts. The walk to the corner and back. The specific quality of light in this room around 4 in the afternoon. Small things, but mine. Purpose doesn't have to announce itself. Sometimes it's just the morning, and the coffee, and the light through the window, and the fact that you're still here to notice. The 7th thing took me until I was well into living alone to admit. I had let my finances become something I didn't fully understand. Earl had managed most of it. Not because I wasn't capable. I managed a household of 8 people on what we brought home, which required its own kind of accounting. But because we had divided things the way people did, and the bills and the accounts had been his column. When he was gone, I discovered how much I didn't know. Not about the money itself, but about where it was, what was automatic, what was owed, what was coming in. I found things I'd been paying for years that I couldn't identify. A subscription to something Earl must have set up that was quietly taking money every month for a service neither of us had used in a decade. It took me the better part of a year to feel like I understood my own situation. My oldest sat with me for 2 full afternoons to help me sort it out. I didn't want to ask. I asked anyway. He didn't make me feel embarrassed about not knowing, which I appreciated more than I told him. I have a folder now. Everything in one place. What comes in, what goes out, when things are due, what the accounts are. It's not complicated when it's organized. The complication was the not knowing. You should know your own numbers, all of them. Not because someone might be taking advantage of you, though that's also a reason, but because knowing is its own kind of security. Because when you understand your situation, you can make decisions from that understanding instead of from fear. There's something I've been thinking about lately that I haven't quite found the words for until now. When Earl was alive, I used to believe that the work of managing a life was something you divided between people. That was just how it operated. You took your half and someone else took theirs. What I didn't understand then, what living alone taught me slowly over years, is that when you're alone, the division doesn't disappear. It just becomes the things you handle and the things you let fall. And you get to choose. Every day you get to choose which is which. There were mornings in that first year when I let a lot of things fall. When the mail piled up and the food got simple and the house got quiet and I told myself it was fine, it was enough. This was just what it was now. Those mornings were a kind of grief. I understand that now, but grief isn't where you stay. I didn't figure everything out at once. I'm still not finished figuring it out, if I'm honest. There are still days when I make toast for dinner and the curtains could use a wash and I don't call anyone because calling feels like too much. But there are also mornings, more of them now, where I sit at this table with coffee in both hands and the light coming in just so, and I think, I built this. This quiet, this order, this life that runs because I run it. Nobody handed me any of it. Nobody told me how. I just kept choosing the things I was going to handle. And slowly, very slowly, the list of handled things got longer and the list of fallen things got shorter. That's all it was. I've been alive for 81 years now, which works out to somewhere around 29,000 mornings. I haven't kept track of all of them, but the ones I'm grateful for, and there are more than I sometimes let myself admit, they tend to look a lot like this one. Quiet, ordinary, mine. I don't know how many more there are. None of us does, and I've made my peace with that particular uncertainty. What I know is that the ones I have are worth the effort of showing up to them properly. That's enough. That's always been enough. If any of what I've said today felt familiar, if some part of it sat somewhere in your chest and stayed there, I hope that's useful to you, whatever that means for your particular life. Thank you for spending this time with me. I mean that more than it probably sounds. If you want to sit here again, come back. That's what the subscribe button is for. Not for anything grand, just for the next time you want to sit with someone a while. Take care of yourself, whatever that means to you.